floating around. And Howard's written a few books, so he'll be talking about that. So Howard, it's all yours.
Now, when Cunningham sent out his thing that I was going to be here and then going to do this talk, he said I was going to be able to do a show and tell. Well, I really can't, because this guy you probably all know and love by the name of John Ochner walked off with all my records and stamps a number of years ago. But I have got some stuff that I'm going to float around. I've got three books here. This first one starts about 1894, goes up to about 1960. This picks up in 1960 and goes basically up to about 2000. And this is kind of interesting. It's just illustrations of various counterfeit stamps that I used to have in my possession. Which raises a very interesting question that was raised earlier. Pass those around, and I've got the same thing over there. Today I got that same solicitation in my email, and I suddenly had the question, when did postage stamps cease being obligations of the government? You know, that's basic federal law that goes back almost to the beginning of the country, the foundation of the post office. And I got into these big battles with Washington about stamps being obligations of the government.
Is that George Washington?
Sure. What?
Is that George Washington?
And the answer I got, they kept on talking about slippage. And, like, you can absorb like about a 20% discount on the stamps that you go out and what's going to be sold. And a discount. And I kept on saying, well, when was the last time the government discounted $20 bills? Because currency and stamps are the same. For 150 years, stamps were hard currency. I put people in prison because they were basically trading on counterfeit stamps, possession of counterfeit stamps. It's got totally out of hand. And not only that, just as an illustration in this book, that this was right when I quit writing, but these are solicitations for heart medication. And they were sent out with counterfeit stamps, and you had an enclosure you could send back, and the discounted heart medication would be sent back through the mail to you, again, using counterfeit stamps. Just totally mind-blowing. But here, I'll start this book going down this side. And this basically shows illustrations of various stamps that I had at one time or another. The first book starts in 1864, starts in 1890 and goes to about 1960. This one picks up 1960 and goes to the present, or 2000, when I got out of the business. Stamps are unbelievable. How I got into it. I got into the inspection service in 1972, shortly after I got out of the service. And my first assignment was Denison, Texas. And my first experience with counterfeit was one day I intercepted this parcel coming from California to a small post office in my territory. I had the 5 counties north of Dallas and Fort Worth that I was responsible for. And it contained about $25,000 in currency, a .38 revolver, and the counterfeit plates. And so I became, very popular with the Secret Service because it led them back to somebody they'd been chasing for some period of time. who was in the process of moving to Texas from California. So I was one step ahead of him. From North Texas, I wound up going to Amarillo for 2 years. And I could see the handwriting on the wall. I actually came out of the post office. All the time I was going to school, I had worked in the post office, and at one time or another I had just about every craft job you could have in the post office. The only thing I never was, I was never a railway mail clerk. But everything else I did, except window clerk. I was never a window clerk. But fortunately for me, about 1965, or no, I think it was 65, there was this massive mail robbery in Massachusetts, like $11 or $12 million. And the inspectors at the time, we were mostly bean counters than anything else, would go around and inspect post offices and count the stamps and money orders and make sure they were doing things right. And so the emphasis was on the accountant part of the thing. And then we had this big robbery, and we got a new chief, and he decided we needed criminal investigators. So that's how I wound up coming into the inspection service. I was on my way to one of the 3-letter intelligence bureaus when Mr. Nixon had a federal hiring freeze, and suddenly I was without a job, and one day, all of a sudden, there was a knock on the door, and there was this guy in a suit and a hat, and he says, "Hi, we knew who you are and what you did. How would you like to carry a badge and a gun?" And so that's how I got recruited in the inspection service. But my first assignment, like I said, was North Texas. I enjoyed it. I told the guys after 3 years in Texas, I don't want to count stamps. I don't want to spend my life telling postmasters how they should be running their offices. I want a criminal assignment. So they said, we got just a job for you. We got 2 openings. We got Detroit and we got Chicago. Which one do you want? And so I went to Chicago, spent the next 3 or 4 years working undercover, making buys on the street of one form or another. And then we had the 10-cent cross-flag counterfeit case suddenly wandered into our office one day. And I was just one of the spear carriers that got drafted to go out and do legwork on that case. And shortly after we wrapped that one up, we had another counterfeit that appeared. That was the 13-cent Kennedy. And the inspector who was supposed to be in charge of that case with the Secret Service, he was kind of an abrasive individual, didn't get along with too many people, especially Secret Service agents. And after about a week of heated phone calls, the boss called me into the office. He said, "You collect stamps, right? You know a little bit about printing and counterfeiting, right? You're now assigned to the Secret Service." So that's how I wound up being shanghaied into the Secret Service for the better part of 10 years and chasing down counterfeit stamps all over the country. Being in Chicago was kind of fortunate because Chicago is kind of the center of printing industry in the United States. And so if you ever needed, used printing equipment, you could find it in Chicago. And so that, there was a lot of activity going on there. But it took me all over the country. And the more of these cases I had, the more frustrated I got with what was going on in DC and why we were not doing something about it, because it was kind of ridiculous what was going on. Because I was, counting things up, and we were losing millions of dollars as this was going on a regular basis. And theoretically, sale of postage, that's supposed to pay your salary. I took that kind of serious. So, anyhow, I started corresponding with John Hochner, who at that time had a column in Linz. John and I became friends. And he talked me into start writing some articles on counterfeit stamps for Linz, and then the APS, and then some other publications. And the idea was I was trying to light a fire under Washington about what was going on. It was really hard to do, to get their attention, let alone to keep it. Because again, you got bean counters. Government, the bigger it gets, the more non-functional it is. And I don't know what we're gonna do today. Because, you know, it keeps on going and going, and you know, individual there was showing me stuff that has been going on since the mid-1990s. I was first exposed to those stamps, you know, back in Seattle, when all of a sudden the office there realized they had a problem, and you know, it's stamps, it's meters. We, you know, in process of doing the stamp investigations, you started wondering, I started, you know, running into meter cases. And then you started dealing with the meter companies and finding out, you know, there's absolutely no accounting for postage meters at all. And it reached the point where at one point, the chief inspector called the president of Pitney Bowes in and told them that we were gonna cancel their license unless they could start giving us an updated listing of the valid meters they had out there. Because, you know, on an annual basis, so many of them were reported stolen or lost, and their meters are still being used. You know, sending tons and tons of stuff through the mail. So it just went on and on and on. But, you know, hey, it kept me occupied for 25 years, what can I say? Working in the inspection service was fun, it was a treat. The undercover part of it was good. The running down counterfeit stamps was good. The street work was good. It was a fun career.
How about thefts of mail?
Huh?
How about thefts of mail?
Actually, theft of mail was never really that much of a problem. You know, that people don't realize what a good deal they had. Basically, the inspection service, it was divided into various branches. You had mail fraud, you had internal theft, you had external crimes, which I was in, and you had mail fraud. The theft of mail was roughly, you know, one quarter of our manpower. And virtually every postal employee in the country was tested on a regular basis to make sure they were not stealing. I remember when I first was in high school, I was working for the post office sorting mail. And one of the first jobs I had was at the dumping table. We'd bring the mail in from collections and then dump it on this big table, and it's, you know, like this conveyor belt going by. And you're supposed to be pulling out registers and all that other good stuff. And I reached in and I pulled this envelope out, this big manila envelope, and it was going from a drugstore to the First National Bank of St. Paul. And you know, when you're handling money, I'm sorry, it has a very distinctive feel, even in an envelope, and I knew there was currency in this. And one thing every post office in the country had, this is before the day of electronic surveillance, we had lookout galleries. Either these secret passages that ran through the post office, and you'd have these little observation slits. And I knew I was being tested, and I turned around and I looked up at the gallery and set it on its way. But give you an idea of how extensive this was. The old Chicago post office, I don't know if you probably all have seen pictures of this 1930 vintage building that has the 6-lane expressway that runs right through the middle of the building. To give you an idea of how big it is. There are 23 miles of secret passages or lookout galleries that run through that building. I mean, that building has been modified so many times with HVAC and everything else, that there are whole sections of the lookout gallery that, you know, we haven't been able to find for years. We had homeless people living there. But anyhow, seriously, the secrecy of the mail was taken very seriously when I went in. We had an operation that was set in motion back during the Second World War, where mail going to Russia would automatically be gathered and would come to certain select post offices, and we would basically record all the information, who it was from and who it was going to, and then it would eventually, go to the mail system for delivery. I can't remember what heinous crime got us caught up in this, but suddenly this became public knowledge that we were doing this. This was in, I gotta say, like around 1975, and it cost our chief inspector at the time his job, because he wound up being the fall guy for it. And this was a program that was begun by FDR. But I don't know, it's been fun. Have any of you ever had any encounters with the postal inspectors? Yeah? Hope they were good.
I saw the movie.
No, we had, it was interesting coming to Texas. It was my first office, right out of school, right out of the academy. Came to North Texas, came to Dallas, which is headquarters for this division, and introduced myself to the boss, and he said, okay, you're going up to Denison. That office has been vacant for about the last 6 months. You've got X number of cases that are piled up on your desk that I expect you to clear. I expect you to do so many post office inspections. At that time, every post office in the country, especially the third and fourth class offices, were inspected on an annual basis. So every post office, you had an inspector come in there, count all the stamps, count all the money orders, do the general whatever had to be done. I expect you to make so many arrests a month. You got your manual, you got a phone. Now get out of here. That was my introduction. Of course, then when I sent in my first expense account, he called me in again, and he said, I've gone over this, and I see you do not have one instance in there where you've taken some county sheriff or some deputy out to dinner. I expect you, every expense account, to take somebody in local law enforcement out to dinner. This again was one of the advantages of being in the inspection service, is we didn't have to account for our expenditures. Unlike the FBI, unlike the Secret Service, unlike any other government agency, we had an open checkbook. And the reason was very simple. There are a lot more cops out there than there were inspectors. And so, to develop relations with local law enforcement, this is what you did. And you'd get on a first name basis, and you'd entertain them, and you'd work cases jointly, because again, I'm here in North Texas, and there's me. Or I go out in Amarillo, and there's me and a partner, for 600 square miles. And you were very much dependent on your local county sheriff, your local deputies, your local Texas Ranger. Texas Ranger used to have, in Amarillo, had the office right next to me on one side. The Speaker of the House had the office on the other side. Another interesting story about, and I've told Sam about this, about being in Denison, is one of the offices in there was Denton, Texas, and I think it was Denton. I'm not sure. May have been right down the road, but it was the only post office in the country that had 2 PMGs. One was appointed by Sam Rayburn, and the other was appointed by the Postmaster General. And they both in office at the same time, and they had facing desks. So, you know, there's always been politics in the post office. Or when I inspect the post office, every congressman in the country, I guarantee, owned a newspaper. And so I'd go in there and I'd do the computations on second-class postage, and I'd always give them a bill. You know, okay, write a check for X thousands of dollars for postage you didn't pay. And sure enough, this would be on a Friday, and Monday morning there'd be a phone call from the congressman's office. You know, why was I harassing his local newspapers? But it was fun years. We covered a lot of territory. I think as a general rule, we were a pretty good agency. I can't guarantee what it's like today. We've had a lot of water under the dam. We've gone through, they came with an OG type thing where we needed an internal affairs outside of our own internal affairs. And so now they kind of split the inspection service into two totally discrete or distinct parts. We've had a series of leaders that really haven't fought for our jurisdiction. We used to fight tooth and nail with the FBI about who had jurisdiction in mail fraud cases. Today, I think the FBI just kind of saunters right in there and takes over a lot of that stuff. I always had very good relations with just about all the various agents, which is one of the reasons I got shoved into counterfeiting, because I can get along with folks. With the exception of the Bureau. Individual agents were great, but as soon as you got up to the administrative levels, you know, the roadblocks would start to pop up. And we had much more freedom in our action and what we did and how we conducted ourselves. It was the advantage of not having a lot of oversight that other agents had. I know stories I've heard from the Bureau is you had a case in Dallas and all of a sudden parts of it were in San Francisco. You know, Ken doesn't just hop on a plane and go to San Francisco. He's got to send out leads there, and you've got another agent who may or may not know the intricacies of the case, who's supposed to pick it up and work with him, or do whatever he's asked to do. In our case, I've got a case that starts in North Texas, and it takes me to Paris. I go down, DFW, and I hop on a plane and I go to Paris. The only requirement is I better have a damn good reason why I went when I come back. So, any other questions about the inspection service, what we did, and how we did it?
Were they people counterfeiting stamps back in the 70s or 80s? Were they printing people, or what kind of characters were the
They
background?
were great guys. You know, I knew I had been in the business for too long when I'd worked this case for like 3 years. It was the Kennedy case, the Kennedy counterfeits. And my wife asked me one Thanksgiving, you know, who you want to, invite over for Thanksgiving dinner? And the first names that pop into my mind are these guys I've been working. That's when you know you've been undercover too long. No, the general lifespan for undercover work is you try to pull an agent out after about 3 years. I've known a couple that have gone longer, but the longer you go, the more screwed up you become. Pistone in New York, the FBI agent, I absolutely love him. Worked the Donnie Brasco case. He was underground for 5 years. How he did it, I've got no idea. Guy out in California, same thing, both bureau agents, super guys. Some of the people you're dealing with on the street level, they were funny characters. A lot of them were prior printers. The small cases, mom and pop type operations. One guy decided to do it. He was just going to do it for extra Christmas money. He did some nice stamps. Then I've got another guy that I chased for 10 damn years and drove me crazy. Da Vinci, who primarily did currency, but every once in a while he'd get a contract from organized crime to run off about $1 million worth of stamps. And there was a lot of stuff that came out in the late 60s, early 70s that I know came off of his press. He was the guy who taught, that one master counterfeiter, Williams. He taught Williams how to do the counterfeit bill, and he produced the first really good $100 bill. Some were interesting guys. I was making one buy at an Italian restaurant on the east side of Chicago. It was on the west side. And we went to this Italian restaurant, and I'm sitting there, negotiating. What you try to do is, of course, the more you can get them to print, the more counterfeits you can seize, the more seriously the government is going to take it. The more upset the judge will become, and the more time they're going to get in prison. And so you're trying to you're trying to work your way from the street back to the press, back to the printers. And so if the press is shut down, you're trying to talk them into opening up the press again and print more counterfeits. And so I'm in this Italian restaurant negotiating with this klutz to get the press up and going again. And all of a sudden, about half a dozen very beefy individuals come walking into the restaurant and sit down in the table directly adjacent to where we are. I'm sitting there negotiating this purchase, and I look over and I immediately recognize one of the individuals, Tony Arcardo, who was the Godfather in Chicago, the unknown Godfather in Chicago. Everybody thought it was Sam Giancana, but it was Arcardo, Tony the Tuna, who was calling the shots. That was a tense meal. Because if he had any idea what was going on alongside of him, he would not have been a happy camper. There was another time we were out serving subpoenas for handwriting to another individual. This was not my case. I just came along for the ride. Jimmy the Bomber Couture was his nickname. And again, this is Chicago, the land of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. So we pull up to this guy's house in our Ford Grand Prix or whatever the hell the damn car was. Knock on the door. Hi, I'm from the Postal Inspection Service. Right you are. All of a sudden you got half a dozen guns shoved in your face and you're up against the wall being patted down. Because again, this is the land of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. They don't believe you're a cop. But we talked our way out of that one. But like I say, some of them were real interesting. Some of them were neat guys. The Kennedy stamp guys, I considered them the over-the-hill mob. The guy who was leading the thing, he'd actually been Capone's driver. And so he used to have great stories about the mob in the 30s and driving for, the different people, Capone and everybody. But they actually had gone to Sandstone, and they were in the federal prison in Sandstone. And that's where they learned how to print, in the print shop.
Minnesota.
Yeah. And so as soon as they got out, you know, they're in business, and shortly thereafter, the counterfeit Kennedys were rolling out on the street.
Howard, about how many of those were there, those counterfeit Kennedys?
Oh, God. Well, this is one of the things, this was the breaking point. I had the Kennedy case in Chicago. I got a call from Miami. All of a sudden, they had a counterfeit Kennedy down there, so I went down to Miami. Turns out that was a different Kennedy stamp. There's a little line above the cent mark. That actually is from a press up in Rhode Island. Went up there and was looking at the counterfeit cases, and it turns out you had a Kennedy stamp up there. It was coming off this press in Rhode Island, press up in northern New York State, and that press, if you look at the counterfeits that were out in the early '80s, late '70s, there's about half a dozen of them that you can tell were all the same basic type. Goes into it in the book here somewhere. But, and then I started contacting the different inspectors in the different divisions. And I found 3 different inspectors in 3 different divisions that were all investigating the same thing. And none of them were talking to one another. And that was one of the downfalls of the inspection service structure, is you had 12 divisions across the country, and everyone treated their little domain as their little empire. And if you start feeding information out to people outside of your division, you would get the boss mad at you. I'm sure you probably encountered the same type of a thing in the bureau. Just drove me absolutely crazy. Anything else? That's all I can think of right at the moment. Yeah.
So in current days, not the modern stuff, meaning forever stamps and related stuff, how many millions of dollars of fake postage have been confiscated versus how many are estimated to have been used, defrauding the government?
You will never get that information from Washington. I have absolutely no idea. I don't think they have the slightest grasp of what is going on and what it is costing them.
And you see that Facebook page thing I handed around, it looks like almost a pallet load of this stuff.
Yeah.
Just for sale here in our area.
You know, I got that email today, and I've been getting those emails on a regular basis. And, you know, all of a sudden it dawned on me, when did stamps cease to become obligations of the government? And I used to go down and, another thing that, drive you nuts is just reuse of postage and all that other good stuff. And I would go down, if I got bored at night, didn't have anything better to do, like be with my family, I'd go down and look at rejects off the Mark II facer cancelers. And I'd get 5 or 6 trays of rejects, and I'd go through them, and I'd come up with a big stack of obviously reused postage. And one day I just, in frustration, I just brought it up to the boss's office and threw him down at his desk and said, "Here, we got a problem with this stuff." That almost got me fired. He called Washington, and he was trying to jack me up for pulling, interrupting the flow of mail. And I had to point out to him, there's also a statute that says before something is mailed, it has to have a valid stamp on it. And if it doesn't have a valid stamp, it's not mail.
Why did you call it reused?
Yeah, it's reused postage.
I mean,
That got us into another nightmare.
reused in what way? I mean, is it?
Take it off.
Once a stamp has gone through the mail,
Yeah,
whether it has been canceled or not,
and not.
if you take it and put it on another envelope and send it through the mail, that is a crime.
And how can you detect that?
Huh?
How can you detect that?
Well, you look for cancellation marks, obviously, or some indication that this thing has been canceled before.
Probably a fourth of the mail I received doesn't have any cancellation on it.
That's absolutely, oh, now you're getting into something else that drove me
So
absolutely
I
crazy.
can't reuse those.
I was out in California and I was looking at rejects, and all of a sudden here all these trays of mail were coming, none of the stamps were canceled. And I talked to the supervisor, you know, what's going on here? He says, well, you know, we got quotas. You know, nobody's, you know, too concerned about how many counterfeits, you know, we find, but we're real concerned with what our delivery standards are. And so they had just turned off the facer cancelers. So there was no canceling going on at all. Which defeats the whole, you know, actually, way back when, before postal modernization in the 1950s, every piece of mail that somebody put in a collection box, I figured it out one time, and I figured that letter with that stamp on it would be handled and examined 19 times by a human being before it got from point A to point B, your mailbox. And then after postal reorganization and modernization and all the mechanization that came in, now the number of people who look at stamps is 0. So you can put anything on an envelope and it will go through. Christmas seals, you name it, it'll go through.
Go to the stickers.
Huh?
Go to the stickers.
Oh, that's ridiculous, crazy.
Revenue stamps.
Anybody else? Any other questions?
Anyhow, I got 2 sets of books that are going around there. They're here for the club, or anybody who wants them, you're welcome to them.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
thank you.
Appreciate it.